Warning: the following video contains personal opinions and may contain potential bias. Anyone sensitive to someone else's opinion may want to turn away now. But thanks for watching anyways. Man, Sun and Moon might have had a decent story, but Tutorial Island, no move tutors, and the Alolan forms were only Kanto Pokemon? Darn it, Game Freak, I can make a better game than them.
Perhaps I could be of assistance with that.
Huh? Who are you?
I am but a humble merchant who deals with relics and discontinued event Pokemon lost to the ether of shut-down Wi-Fi servers. Here, take this Mankey's paw. It once belonged to a Mankey who saw Mega Evolution as its chance to regain relevance in the eyes of the fandom. But when denied a Mega Evolution in X and Y, and once again an Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, the lack of new Mega Evolutions in Sun and Moon crushed its will to go on, but its passionate desires continued to thrive. It is said that the Mankey's paw will grant the wishes of those who share desires as strong as its own. But be warned, for the wishes come with a deadly curse.
Ooh. Hey, wait. Can Mankey even learn curse? Huh? Hey, where'd that shopkeeper go? Ah well. I wish for a new version of Pokemon Sun and Moon, with move tutors, new Pokemon, an enhanced story where Necrozma is the focus, and all the things that should have been in the first game. God, you kidding me? The story sucked. Why wasn't it just Pokemon Stars? And why wasn't it on the Nintendo Switch? Okay, Pa, listen closely. I want a new Pokemon game for the Nintendo Switch. I don't want it to be set in Alola. Give us a region we haven't been to this generation. I want it to look better. I want stuff we haven't seen before. I don't want it to be a port. I don't want it to feel like $50 DLC. And I don't want just Kanto Pokemon to be in it. You got all that? Oh, come on! Kanto again? Gah, this game's gonna suck. Aww.
Oh my god, that's so cute.
D'Artagnan is restless, darting between you. Oh god.
Darn it. I don't have
Oh my
thing.
god, no, darn it. Oh, it wanted to do high five. Oh.
I'm jealous now.
Darn it, I missed a chance to play high five with D'Artagnan. So, welcome everyone to the Silver League's top 5 pros and cons of Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. Honorable mentions. So an honorable mention has to go out to the Pokeball Plus, because obviously I was going to buy something like this. It's a Pokeball-shaped video game controller that helps with both Pokemon Go and with Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee itself. Though it's absolutely unnecessary, despite how much they advertised it, it is a really nice little trinket. As a video game controller, it's pretty alright, though kind of clunky and takes getting used to, because it is pretty small, so grasping around it can be a little awkward, made worse by its control scheme, where pushing down on the joystick, the thing you use to move, is the A button, which on more than one occasion has resulted in me accidentally misclicking, because as I was pushing down on the joystick, I accidentally moved the joystick forward, resulting in me in a split second clicking on the wrong move by mistake. The B button is relegated to a soft rubbery part of the red side of the Pokeball that you can push down on, and shaking the Pokeball Plus is the Y button, and that's about it. No X button, and no triggers. The triggers you can live without, but the lack of an X button does make navigating through the menus kind of tricky and a bit more awkward. It takes a bit more effort, but you can get used to it, but it's still weird that for how much they advertise this controller, the game isn't optimized for it. Heck, even when you are registered using the controller while playing the game, the menus and tutorials aren't changed to illustrate the control scheme for the Pokeball Plus, which is just baffling. It's just very strange. But besides that, you can transfer any Pokemon in the game into the Pokeball Plus and effectively turn your Pokeball into a Tamagotchi. A pretty fun Tamagotchi because occasionally the Pokemon will want to interact with you and you can interact with them. It's somewhat limited what you can do, but still nevertheless quite cool to hear their cries coming out of the Pokeball, sometimes at their own will, though sometimes that can be very awkward when you're just out in public and suddenly Eevee or Pikachu are just calling out to you. Eevee and Pikachu being the only two Pokemon in the game who actually say their names as opposed to just their in-game cries. And through the Pokeball Plus, you can get items, experience, and all sorts of goodies that can just help your gameplay experience, and also make game to level 100 all the more easier. On top of that, you can somewhat obviously use this with Pokemon Go to make catching Pokemon and spending Pokestops just a little bit more convenient, as you can do without having to actually boot up the game, provided that the Pokeball is synced with your game, which you may have to redo every so often, because I've had that happen quite a few times. And of course, anytime you restart the game, you have to resync your Pokeball with the game itself as well. Overall, the Pokeball Plus is a really well-made piece of technology. It's very sturdy, it can take a fall, I've had mine drop a couple times. It may not be 100% scratch proof, so you'll want to be careful of that, but I do really admire the sound quality, and the light up feature of the Pokeball is really nice. It has pretty much every color you could think of, or at least a nice variety of colors. It's not limited to just red, blue, and green. There is a whole spectrum of color coming out of this thing, and they're all representative and specific to the Pokemon themselves, including if they're shiny. That's a touch I really like. Overall, it's a pretty fantastic little accessory. It's completely optional, ignoring the one bit of contention a lot of people have with it, where it's, as of this recording, the only way you can get Mew in Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, outside of importing one from Pokemon Go. I know a lot of people have frowned at this, calling this basically glorified $50 DLC, but come on. Realistically speaking, they could just as easily release another Mew event at some point down the road, and maybe it could even be a proper event, even though that's not likely to happen, because that would technically require it being DLC, and DLC is not something they are planning to do, so I wouldn't hold my breath on that one. But nevertheless, distribution events do happen. Mew isn't required to complete the Pokedex. I know a lot of people would want Mew, but the Mew in the Pokeball Plus is one per Pokeball, so it's in a similar vein to Manaphy and Pokemon Ranger, and really, it's just a nice little bonus. If you're getting the Pokeball Plus, don't get it for Mew, don't go in with that mentality. It's a nice little, albeit kind of clunky controller that's a fun gimmick that I went in thinking it would be a challenge, and it ended up proving to be actually, in some regards, the superior way to play if you're playing it docked. I know some people might raise suspicion to that, thinking that it was a conspiracy in order to push the sales of the Pokeball Plus, but at the same time, controlling the game overall is better in handheld mode, which, hey, how convenient is that, huh? But all of that said, the Pokeball Plus is neat, and it did deserve a mention, but it's neither a pro nor a con, because it's technically not a part of Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee itself, but it is something that I knew a lot of people would ask about if I omitted it from the list. So it deserved that shout out, and at the same time, I really did enjoy it, and I don't regret purchasing it, even if it was quite the pretty penny as a result. Pro number 5. Minimal tutorials. Now, shortly after the announcement of Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, we got to see live demonstrations of the game in action. And among these live demos, we got to see the Pewter City Gym, where you were required to bring a water or grass type to even be able to challenge the gym leader. And right away, this raised so many red flags for people, because oh my god, they were going to turn Pewter City into Tutorial City. But actually, it turns out, no, they weren't really doing that. Now, it is true, every single gym in the game does require you to accomplish a certain task if you want to challenge the gym leader, but realistically speaking, you'll have already accomplished every single one of these tasks before you even got to the gym if you're playing the game normally. And while it can be argued that it's a bit egregious, ultimately, it's a subtle way to actually teach you certain things while not stopping the entire game and telling you, hey, here's how type charts work. It was actually quite subtle and not too bad, and actually added a bit of character to the gyms themselves. Honestly though, the only tutorial in the entire game is a very brief tutorial at the very start where the game teaches you how to catch Pokemon, which in this game is actually necessary since catching Pokemon is the one thing that has actually drastically changed from this game compared to other core titles. And it's not a long tutorial either, and even if you played Pokemon Go, it's not a one-to-one translation. It's familiar, but the very nature of how Pokemon is caught in this game is different to how it's been done beforehand, so it actually is necessary to teach the player how to do that. And pretty much after that one tutorial, you're selling your way and you can do whatever you want. It's weird to think that the fact that there's minimal tutorials, the fact that the game doesn't actively hold your hand, is a pro on this list, but given how egregious tutorials were in Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, really, I gotta give praise where I see it. And the fact that tutorials went back to being optional things that are only relegated to mostly NPCs that you can talk to early on throughout the game, but could otherwise completely skip, it's oddly refreshing, and it's kind of sad to say that, but at the very least, it means that they are potentially paying attention to the complaints that Tutorial Island initiated, and that Game Freak is finding ways to teach the player in more subtle ways, other than stopping the plot every 5 or 10 minutes to give some kind of new tutorial on another gimmick. It's sad that it took 2 games for us to get to this point, but at the very least, It's a good sign for Generation 8. Maybe. Hopefully. But yeah, it was quite the relief to find out that Pewter City wasn't Tutorial City after all. Con number 5. We didn't need 2 versions. They really didn't. Let's be honest here. The only reason why they do 2 versions still at this point is a combination of tradition and admittedly potential greed. Because you are going to get people, like myself, who are willing to pay for what is essentially the same game twice. Making 2 versions made more sense back in the good old days of Gen 1 because it was there to encourage interacting with other players, whether through battle, or more cleverly, or evilly depending on how you look at it, through trades. Specifically for trade evolutions, or more importantly, those version exclusive Pokemon. But with the evolution of technology as well as the internet, the necessity for 2 versions has diminished with each generation. And it has been ever more apparent than with Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. Because here's the thing, up until now, Pokemon games, or at least the ones I've been purchasing, have cost at max $50 Canadian. So for the certain lunatic who's going to buy both versions, it doesn't hit the wallet too badly. But Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee cost, after taxes, $90 Canadian each. These are full-price Nintendo Switch games. Now one could make the argument, well, why don't they just charge cheaper for Pokemon games? The main reason why I don't think they'll ever charge under what is otherwise known as the standard Nintendo Switch game price is because Pokemon in many ways is effectively the 3rd part in the Nintendo trilogy of the unstoppable AAA titles that'll always sell gangbusters. It's Mario, Zelda, and Pokemon. And charging even $60 for a core Pokemon game on the Nintendo Switch might give the general audience perception that it's somehow less than, say, a Mario Odyssey or a Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. It's stupid, but that's the market. But with all of that said, we don't need 2 versions of what is effectively the same game, especially when it's supposed to be technically a remake of Pokemon Yellow, which I'll remind you, based on the fact I just said Yellow version, not versions, was 1 game, and you split it into 2 games. True, Heart Gold and Soul Silver were technically a remake of Pokemon Crystal, except they effectively split it into the Gold and Silver versions with Crystal stuff added onto them. But again, those games were roughly $50 at the time, not $90. Which means, yes, I personally have spent roughly $220 after taxes on Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee because I bought both versions and the Pokeball Plus. I got the bundle, but that maybe saved me roughly $10 if you do the math. I'm not quite sure how it works out. But either way, I spent too much on these games, and when the Nintendo Switch allows you to do multiple save files effectively, thanks to the wonder that is multiple accounts having their own save files of these games, since the save data isn't actually on the cartridge itself, which is a thing I really don't like, the need for 2 versions so that you could, say, replay one of these games is even more unnecessary. The only thing that justifies the 2 versions is the version exclusive content and the starter you get at the beginning. And nothing is stopping you from releasing a Pokemon game where you can pick between Pikachu or Eevee at the very start of the game. You gotta do more to justify the 2 versions existing, and Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee does very, very little to justify that. It is very much a case of how Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon should not have been 2 versions either. Pro number 4. Cutscenes, cameos, tributes, and overall excellent presentation. This is probably going to sound like another weird one, but I really did like the presentation in this game. I was initially hesitant if I would like a version of Pokemon where we don't have really cool cell shading with the black outlines, but as it turns out, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee actually looks really, really good. Well, for most part. Some Pokemon don't translate to the new style as well as others. Mew in particular just looks kind of weird and gross to me just because of how overly glossy it is. But then you look to Pikachu and Eevee, go figure, and you can actually see very nice texturing on their fur patterns. But I mean, they're the title Pokemon of the game, where you have the little interactive thing with them, which really shows off the detail in particular, so it makes sense that they are the ones who look really good in this game, but nevertheless, it's a good sign of what's there to come when we get to a proper Gen 8 game. But besides the Pokemon themselves, attack animations look really good. Waterfall is gorgeous in this game. Electric type attacks in particular look amazing. Eevee's signature ice move is just the coolest looking thing ever. Fire type moves look fantastic. Everything about this game just looks really, really good. But on top of that, I never quite expected just how much effort would go into the presentation. Stuff like the cutscene with Bill, the SS Anne, everything with the Marowak scene. Just the amount of effort that went into that alone shows just the amount of effort they are putting into this game that very easily elevate this game above the potentially cynical remake this could have been. And yet it still doesn't stop there. Sure, you have to expect the cameos of anime Jesse, James, and Meowth, because they were there in the original Pokemon Yellow, though it's a crime that Meowth doesn't talk in this game, though I know why they didn't do that, because then they'd have to explain why this Meowth can talk but not others. But you have characters like Archer, who have been retconned from Heart Gold and Soul Silver into this game to in many ways potentially future-proof this game if they actually do a Let's Go Johto, where his role in that game will actually make a lot more sense, because he will have already been introduced in these games, and it's quite cool to see an expansion on his character, as well as an actual theme to his team. And then you even have surprise cameos like Mina, a younger Mina from Sun and Moon, who looks like she's maybe a teenager at this point, and that's just a really cool detail. It ties us back to its earlier Generation 7 games, and shows that this game does indeed take place in the past before Sun and Moon. Sure, the whole parallel dimension thing makes continuity just kind of a joke at this point, but nevertheless the detail is there and it's a very nice touch. And then of course you have Red, Blue in particular still being the Blue/Gary we all know and love. So for all of those people who are very mad at them potentially ruining Gary in this game, don't worry, because that Gary is right over there, and he actually plays a pretty key role in the plot, and actually makes elements of the plot make somewhat more sense. And then there's the very pleasant surprise of Green, a shout out to the manga. There's just so many nods and tributes to other Pokemon related media within this game. It made it feel like this game had soul. It felt like they were trying. It wasn't just a pointless cameo for the sake of just, oh hey, here's Colress. The tributes and cameos actually amounted to something. And that is really cool. That's really, really nice. And really, I can't say much more than they tried. All of this stuff comes off like they're genuinely trying. And I appreciate that. Con number 4. Severely limited character customization options. How many times is a pros and cons list of a core Pokemon game gonna have a part where I rant about the lack of character customization options? Well, this time I mean it, because Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee by far has the most limited character customization we've seen to date for a game to actually offer character customization in the first place. There's a decent number of articles of clothing to choose from. Shoes, pants, shirt, hat, backpack, and you even got a few clothing options for your starter. All of that's well and good, but it's just a shame that by the time you reach the end of the game, you end up finding out that there aren't actually that many options to choose from. Especially if you're playing the Pikachu version, because in the Eevee version, you end up getting an outfit representative of every single Eevee evolution. Now that's a good handful of options, and some of these do look pretty darn cool and snazzy. But Pikachu, you don't get that. You don't get literally 8 different outfits to choose from, because, of course, Pikachu doesn't have 8 evolutions. But another small detail that I kind of took issue with, you can't actually customize your character much at all. You can't change your haircut, you can't change your eye color, the most you can do is pick your skin color, and that's about it. Once again, body type isn't an option, not that I was expecting that, but you know, it still doesn't hurt to bring it up. If I bring it up enough times, eventually we'll get it, and then I'll be really, really happy. But as it stands, yeah. Pokemon Go, the moment I made that top 5 pros and cons video for it, we've seen so many new outfits coming in, which puts a big old egg on my face. But I kind of knew that was going to happen because that game actually has new content added to it. Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, I don't think they're going to add new outfits to it, even though they very easily could. Again, give us little things like buying Red's outfit so we can actually look like Red from the original games. Or Ash, I guess, since this is supposed to be a Yellow remake. Or even Ash's anime outfits, although that would be really cool and neat. But that's all minor quibbles. The lack of options is pretty lame, but then again, as we saw in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, that game didn't have character customization options because the game it was remaking didn't have customizable characters in the first place, and neither did Yellow version. So the fact that we got any customization at all is something that I gotta show gratitude for. So I won't be too greedy, but I can't deny that the limited options do kind of sour things just a little bit. But not too much, and that's why it's pretty low on the list. Pro number 3. The catching mechanic is not intrusive. The biggest change to Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee was how you encountered Pokemon, where every encounter features no battling, it's just catching. The only time you actually battle Pokemon is a few exceptions limited to mostly legendaries and a very small handful of other Pokemon and trainer battles. and Pokemon were now visible walking around in the overworld, giving you the ability to choose when you encounter certain Pokemon, unless of course they spot you in their radar and feel like chasing after you. But in the months leading up to the release of Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, my biggest concern regarding the game was how this potential segmentation of gameplay would affect the overall experience. And overall, it honestly didn't affect it in any sort of truly negative way. In fact, there were some massive improvements to it. Wild encounters were quick and efficient. If you ran into a Pokemon or a Pokemon ran into you, it was very easy to get out of the encounter. Setup wasted no time at all. There was no waiting around to see what Pokemon you were encountering, and then have more time eaten up by seeing your character throw out their Pokemon. And then wait for the menus to show up, then hit run, and then find out you can't run away because you're slower than the opposing Pokemon. None of that is in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Pokemon shows up, you hit run, the Pokemon isn't even in the overworld anymore. It's quick, efficient, it makes the process of encountering and catching Pokemon all the more easy and less of a grind, especially since without wild encounters, how are you going to gain experience points? Either by battling trainers or catching Pokemon. A lot of Pokemon. But the game is very smartly designed around this. Just about every trainer that you battle in the game, with the exception of the ones that you battle in gyms, can give you either Pokeballs, Great Balls, or Ultra Balls, which can lead to some very unintentionally funny game text, such as, well, this. But as a result, assuming you're playing the game normally like I did as a bit of a social experiment, you'll end up with so many Pokeballs that you'll be able to play the entire game without having to go to a shop once to buy more. There are plenty of trainers hanging around, mostly in caves, who will give you more Pokeballs if you run out, so the game is very wisely designed around the fact that you'll be catching Pokemon a lot, but even if you're not, you'll receive more than enough to get through the entire game, and the experience of these wild encounters during my playthrough almost never got tedious. As I said previously, playing with the Pokeball Plus is pretty seamless and easy, but the Joy-Con could use a bit of work. And in handheld mode, you have added motion controls, which makes the experience of catching Pokemon even easier, oddly enough, because you can literally just tilt the entire Switch around so that when the Pokemon jumps to one side, whoop, you can just move so that you can align your shot with the Pokemon. Now, it is worth also noting that from my own experience, I can't tell if the accuracy of your throw actually matters. Research I've done for this video, and just for my own curiosity, has found contradictory results whether or not nice, great, or excellent actually matter, and from my own experience, I've had excellent throws just not work, and it was always the most irritating aspect of the catching mechanic because I was always left wondering if the accuracy of my throws actually mattered. I know it gets you more experience, but does it actually increase the odds of the Pokemon being caught? I can never find that out, and I always found that baffling because the one thing that this game does, because one of the biggest core mechanics of this game is catching Pokemon, and the game doesn't reward you for getting better at catching them. So there were always those moments where I wish I could weaken the Pokemon so that my Pokeballs in particular were more effective against certain Pokemon, because wow, it does not take long before Pokeballs just have a red ring circle as opposed to green, basically making them effectively useless. But as you can see throughout a lot of my footage, that didn't really stop me from just seeing how far I could get with just the Pokeballs. And I never ran out. I always had a plentiful supply because trainers are always giving you more. So everything about this works, and I think there is room for improvement. There are the few times where you have to battle a Pokemon before you can catch them, but actually weakening them has nothing to do with the gameplay of catching a Pokemon. It's literally just a, albeit admittedly pretty quick battle that in some ways sort of feels tacked on. And you also have to drop the Pokemon's HP to 0, which completely contradicts everything we've been taught for the last 20 years. But again, there's room for improvement. I really do wish you could weaken the Pokemon, but the berry mechanics from Go are there, and they do work, and they are helpful in their own rights. I just think if this mechanic were to return or be retained, I think it would be nice if they kept the catching mechanic, but still let you battle the Pokemon, weaken it, so stuff like Pokeballs could be more effective, and most of all, make it so that the accuracy of your throw actually matters. That's all I want. If it mattered already in this game, great, but enhance that for future titles, and I think you'll make me in particular a happy camper. But overall, one of the most pleasant surprises for me throughout this game was the fact that catching Pokemon didn't feel like a gimmick. It felt like a natural part of this particular game. And that was pretty nice to see. Con number 3. Mobile device compatibility / Go Parks. Oh dear Arceus, this one. I didn't expect this to be on the list. No, not at all. In the months leading up to the release of Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, I decided, you know what? let's try Pokemon Go properly. Let's see what all the hype is about, so that way we can maximize compatibility with Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, show off a few gimmicks for the Let's Play, and just, you know, get the full experience, since not having Pokemon Go was effectively omitting at least a tenth of the game, since Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee traded in the Safari Zone, a fan favorite feature of the original games, for Go Parks, the self-contained gimmick for this game to give it compatibility with Pokemon Go. And I couldn't ignore that feature, could I? No, of course not. Especially since Go Parks is effectively the only way to get Meltan, both for Pokemon Go and for Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. So I buckled down, learned the game, understood the game, was able to make a top 5 pros and cons about the game, and then we get to the Let's Play, and then the saddest line of text appears on my phone: device not supported. And then my heart sank. Yeah, as it turns out, not every mobile device is compatible with the Nintendo Switch and can't communicate with it in order to do the transferring between Pokemon Go and Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. The weird thing is, my phone is only roughly 4 years old. Well, technically 5 now since it's 2019. But nevertheless, that doesn't seem that old. Is technology that far advancing that a 4 to 5 year old phone isn't compatible with the Nintendo Switch? The phone runs Pokemon Go perfectly fine. It's compatible with the Pokeball Plus. So what's stopping it from being compatible with the darn game? This, I admit, is a deeply personal con. It's pretty much only here because it's my personal experience, but I'm sure there are plenty of people who might be potentially experiencing the same thing, where they got that infamous message on their phone that says, device not supported. It's heartbreaking. It's truly heartbreaking when you didn't test this in advance because you wanted that fresh moment when you finally got the Go Parks. So even if you have Pokemon Go, there's a chance you may not be able to connect with these games, and that would really suck, because you actively are losing roughly maybe a tenth of potential features within this game. You're losing access to a solid part of the game they were actively marketing, and that's terrible. That really is. And the thing is, Go Parks wasn't that great. There's not that much you can really do in it. It's pretty much the equivalent of the transfer pack in Pokemon Stadium, where you can send Pokemon back and forth into the game. Well, actually not back and forth, because as it turns out, you can't send Pokemon back into Pokemon Go. It's a one-way street. You can send any Pokemon you catch from Go into Let's Go, which I suppose is one way to omit the limit to how many Pokemon you can catch in Go without having to shell out money, but it's not like you can actually send them back. And the same goes for Meltan's evolution Melmetal, where for all the effort you need to go through in order to evolve a Meltan into a Melmetal, transferring it to Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee is a permanent decision. All that effort, all that brutal effort to evolve a Meltan, and you can't use it in Pokemon Go ever again, unless you go through the extreme nonsense of getting a second one. So we lost the Safari Zone in favor of a feature that allows you to transfer Pokemon from Go to Let's Go, but not send them back. And at the same time, it makes completing the Pokédex in Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee kind of a joke. Many people who are playing Pokemon Go might have a near completed Kanto Dex, which means that the process of completing the Pokédex in Let's Go is completely easy if you have access to Pokemon Go in the first place. Even myself, for the few months that I was playing Go in the lead up to Let's Go, I had at least over 100 Kanto Pokemon caught by the time the game came out. So if you have a phone that's compatible with the Switch, you might have a way easier time completing the Pokédex. So it kind of takes away from the experience of completing the Pokédex in Let's Go. I don't think you got experience for transferring them over, but nevertheless, it is a small negative, not a deal breaker. But man, the lack of compatibility really irks me, and I really do miss the Safari Zone. It was a cool feature, and it would have been nice to see how they could have uplifted it for the Nintendo Switch, but that didn't happen, and it just continues the trend of the Safari Zone, one way or another, always getting screwed over in these kind of games. Can't they just give us a nice little place where there's a bunch of rare Pokemon and you can just run around and catch as many as you can? I like that kind of feature, and I think a lot of people did too. It was a fun, little, interesting diversion, and Go Parks, it just made me sad. If you want proof of this, just check out the episode of the Let's Play where I went to Go Parks and just see the infinite sadness I quickly spiraled down into. Oh boy. Oh boy. Pro number 2. The game can actually be challenging. Coming off the heels of fear of tutorials and the change in catching mechanics, and then the revelation that there were no Eevees, abilities, or even hold items, a lot of people, myself included, were worried that this would be Baby's first Pokemon. And in fact, no, in some ways quite the opposite actually. As it turns out, this game does not hold your hand and will very quickly out of nowhere become quite the challenging game if you're not ready for it. Similar to the point I made in the last Pro regarding catching mechanics, This game in particular is very wisely built around the changes it's made. Sure, there are no Eevees anymore, but there are Avies, otherwise known as Awakening Values. Awakening Values are, in a bizarre way, potentially a tribute to how Eevees worked in the original Gen 1 games, because every single stat on a Pokemon can be raised by 200. And this isn't like Eevees, where 4 points equal 1 stat. Every Awakening Value you give a Pokemon raises its stat by 1. And that's just crazy! That means that even a level 1 Pokemon can have insanely high stats compared to many other Pokemon you'll encounter throughout the game. And on paper, this sounds like a nightmare. And getting 200 AVs in every stat would indeed be a nightmare. But this is incorporated into the catching mechanics, because catching Pokemon and releasing them gets you candies. These candies are what up Pokemon's stats to get those 200 AVs in every stat. Now this isn't necessary at all for online play, since there are options that we'll get to that turn those AV values off. But in the game's main campaign itself, it can and does lead to very interesting trainer battle design. Because ace trainers throughout the Pokemon franchise have always been regarded as the harder trainers. And in this game, they can actually be quite the challenge. Because ace trainers, coach trainers, who are trainers you can get TMs from, actually have Pokemon who have AVs set on them. So that way they're actually quite the challenge to fight if you're not prepared for them. And then you have the Master Trainers, 153 trainers spread across the Kanto region in the post-game, who are one-on-one mirror matches where their Pokemon have special AVs and movesets designed to circumvent their own weaknesses, and are pretty much intended to be the ultimate challenge for this particular Pokemon. With a few exceptions, because there are a handful of Master Trainers who simply want to see a really strong version of their particular Pokemon. So to have very tough trainers like this sprinkled out throughout the game was quite the treat to see. And even then, there are trainers within gyms or even out in the wild who will out of nowhere have pretty clever, if not outright annoying or very tough strategies. Koga's gym in particular is especially guilty of this, mostly because screw that muck that had evasion boosting moves and was basically relying on poisoning all of your Pokemon while dodging all of your attacks, and then spamming Protect, and for some reason Moonblast. I don't get that, but the boss design throughout this game is very clever. It reminds me a lot of how the totem battles in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon were very well designed battles, assuming you weren't powering your way through them with overly leveled Pokemon. They weren't just dumbing things down, they changed a lot of the core fundamentals, but they built a solid game around those changes. And I have nothing but praise for that. I love that. And the fact that this game actually had some bite to it is impressive. A lot of people went into this thinking it would be stupidly easy. And in some ways it is, but at other times, it provided a proper challenge and required a lot of us to rethink strategies based on these changes that were thrust upon us. And that, I gotta give them full praise for that. I didn't expect it, and overall, I quite enjoyed it. So yeah, good work Game Freak, good work indeed. All of that said though,
Con number 2.
the competitive meta is incredibly flawed. There's a lot I can unpack here, but I'll get the big one out of the way now. Stealth Rocks is in this game, and yet Rapid Spin isn't. In fact, there is no hazard removal in this game whatsoever, despite the fact that you have a Pokemon like Starmie in this game, which can clearly, very easily should be able to learn Rapid Spin, but it is not part of its move pool. And the only reason why I can think there's no hazard removal in this game is because with the lack of abilities, with the lack of EVs, a Pokemon like Onix losing its ability Sturdy greatly decreases its ability to stay on the field for a very long period of time, and thus its role in a potential team is greatly diminished. But the prospect of it being able to set up Stealth Rocks, and thus greatly hinder Pokemon like Charizard and other flying types, gives it some means of relevance, as well as possibly addressing potential stall throughout a match, because every Pokemon will be constantly taking damage, and with no leftovers, and very few ways to actually recover HP efficiently, it sort of, vaguely, maybe has balance, but it's still a very diminishing prospect that just doesn't sit right with me at all. Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee did a lot of changes. The mechanics were very smoothly integrated, but it wasn't without its flaws. Pokemon like Ekans lose a lot by not having their abilities, because the Arbok family's not great early game stats, coupled with at least Intimidate, made for a Pokemon that, at the very least, could be playable in a setting where things are a lot more simplified. Adding to that is the handful of Pokemon who previously had the ability Levitate, with a lot of them coincidentally being Pokemon who otherwise would have had a ground type weakness. But now with the lack of abilities, they've lost a convenient edge they previously had. Jesse and James' team of Weezing and Arbok, if they had their abilities, would actually be at least decent when facing in a main story campaign, because Earthquake, or at least a ground type move, wouldn't run over both of them at the exact same time. It would be weakened by Intimidate, and the Weezing would just outright be immune to it. But that's just within the campaign itself. These two Pokemon, for example, don't really work in a competitive sense because now these Pokemon just have a multitude of weaknesses and their general strategies don't work because they can't synergize with Pokemon who would use Earthquake. These changes almost seemingly call back to the early game RPG mechanics of the original Gen 1 games, where there are a lot of Pokemon you can encounter early on that, generally speaking, it felt like you were expected to eventually replace with stronger versions of them. Not literally stronger versions as in higher level, but just other Pokemon of similar types who are just statistically better. Similar to how early on you could catch a Pidgey or a Spearow who would evolve into a Pidgeot or a Fearow respectively, but alternatively you could catch a Doduo that would evolve into a Dodrio, which overall was a better Pokemon just based on sheer stats and moves they can actually learn. On top of all of that, Special Attack and Special Defense back in Gen 1 were just the special stat. And the fact that there was only the special stat greatly affected the viability of certain Pokemon. Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee does not incorporate the Gen 1 stats. It uses the stats we've long been familiar with, and as a result, certain Pokemon within the confines of just the Kanto Dex, and their Alolan forms, and a couple others, have some of their potential viability nerfed by just the changes these mechanics usher in. But with the lack of abilities, things are changed even further, so that in many ways, what we still have is a rather small pool of Pokemon to choose from, which are truly actually properly good, even within the confines of the changes for this game in particular. Well, unfortunately, Pokemon like Arbok and other early game encounters basically sit on the bench because their viability is pretty much hindered by the fact that they've lost a lot of what made them properly good. Or at least potentially good, if nothing else. IVs are still a thing in this game, but without breeding, the only way to get good IVs on a Pokemon is either by chaining a lot of that Pokemon until you catch one with really good IVs, and the right nature because nature is still in this game, or once you've caught a Pokemon that you're happy with, as far as the nature is concerned, Hyper Train it, which requires you to grind to level 100, which can only be done post-game basically by battling the Elite Four a lot or catching more Pokemon. In that regard, it is handy because you'll be catching Pokemon to get good IVs in the first place, and then you still need to catch Pokemon to level up. So on one hand, you can be leveling up a Pokemon while working toward another Pokemon with good IVs. It saves you a bit of time, but it still kind of reminds you of Gen 5, where the only way to get properly competitive was, well, to grind a lot to get the level 100, because that's going to get you the best end results that you need to succeed in this kind of game. And all of this is in favor of a game where there are no EVs, unless you battle with AVs on, and at which point you're basically going to be maxing everything out to 200, which is ultimately just going to slow the game down because we'll get to this later. Matches only have a hard time limit of 20 minutes, which on one hand should encourage faster paced battles, but on the other hand could encourage stalling once you have a lead. There's minimal recovery in the game, no hazard removal, no weather, a lot has been removed and a lot has been watered down. The game is not without its own clear signs of experimentation with seeing what works and doing certain kind of really smart changes, like the changes they made to teleport, and giving Pokemon like Arcanine play rough so that they have something to defeat the one dragon in the game with. But considering other things I'm going to be talking about in the very next con, the prospect of taking Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee seriously as a meta is kind of far-fetched. It's doable, but it's also made worse by the final fact I'll bring up. Pikachu and Eevee, the special ones that you get in this game, which do have enhanced stats so that you don't abandon them immediately within the game itself, because they are stronger than a normal Pikachu and Eevee, are 100% exclusive to their own games. You can't trade them to another game, you can't have both on the same team, and while they both have really good exclusive moves to themselves, Eevee has so many amazing moves that are downright broken almost. Eevee has an attacking move that auto burns, auto paralyzes, sets up a Leech Seed, sets up a Reflect, sets up a Light Screen, sets up a Haze, and even its own water version equivalent of Giga Drain. While Pikachu has an Electric Stab Extreme Speed that always criticals, a Water-type move that can paralyze, and a really good flying move that attacks immediately without a turn of charge up. That's all Pikachu gets. Not much, but it does give pretty universal coverage, where Eevee has amazing coverage. And the fact that they're 100% exclusive to their respective versions is stupid, because honestly I think the people who pick the Pikachu version are at more of a disadvantage than if they pick the Eevee version, where the Eevee is straight up unpredictable just based on the plethora of moves it has to choose from. That stuff ain't fair, and it's incredibly flawed as a result. Ignoring the mechanics of how online actually works, the idea of a meta is just not garbage, but somewhat laughable. You gotta take it with a grain of salt. A massive, massive grain of salt. Otherwise, it's fun for what it is, but by no means is it going to replace the core Gen 7 games that have been out previously. But hey, they had to include it, right? Even if it clearly had the main campaign in mind. Flaws and all. And the number 1 pro of Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee is... the game is just fun. So when I originally made my top 5 hopes for Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, my number 1 hope was just that the game was fun, that it felt finished, that it felt like a completed game. Because at the time, Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon soured a lot of people's enthusiasm for Generation 7 and even Pokemon as a whole. It was the first time that people were starting to catch on to a potential cynicism within the franchise, and it was the first time that a core Pokemon game, especially an expansion one, properly felt like it was just glorified DLC. There wasn't enough there to actually justify the game existing. And for a while, in a lead up to Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee's release, when friends were asking me if they should consider buying the game, I couldn't completely commit to a yes. I was actually telling them, no, you should probably skip or at least wait. Because while I was guaranteed to buy the game no matter what because of, well, what I do for a living, and because I have committed myself to buying every single Pokemon game that ever comes out, even if it's the same game twice, my decision to purchase the game was already set, and it didn't matter what my opinion was of the games. But then the games finally came out. There was still a lot of negativity going in, but pretty much before I was even done recording my very first session of the Let's Play, it was quickly surprising me. I was enjoying myself. I was having fun. The change in mechanics felt nice. It was almost refreshing to not have to think so hard about the games. It was fun to just go through a game and just experience it, not having to worry about a competitive meta, about being able to just enjoy the game for what it is. And then you have the other things I brought up throughout this video. The cutscenes, the cameos, the tributes, the very nice presentation. All of these things were pleasant and charming surprises. The most recurring statement made throughout the entire Let's Play was just how charming the game was, how nice it was, how cute the Pokemon were, how fun it was to just play this game. It's a hard thing to emphasize, but the game is fun. Even though we're technically exploring Kanto for the 4th time ever counting Heart Gold and Soul Silver, it still felt fresh here somehow. Yes, it's familiar territory, but it's such a massive facelift that it felt new. Because it wasn't a straight remake either. Story-wise, it is basically a parallel world, because that's everyone's favorite storytelling mechanic now. But it allowed effectively for a retcon of the story, to incorporate everything that's come before it, and make a game that told its own story that was set in the Kanto region that was familiar, especially if you played the Gen 1 games already, but if you never did, it was technically a new experience for you. And while I have played Pokemon Blue, I have played Fire Red, and I have played Soul Silver, the experience of going through Kanto in this iteration, it didn't feel like something I've done before. There was enough different here that it felt fresh, and again, I had fun. And the biggest praise I can say is, I think if you play this game with the mindset of it just being a Pokemon game that cherry picks mechanics, things, and details from other games, and makes its own confined, standalone experience, you're going to have a good time. A metaphor I've used throughout the Let's Play and the way I've described it to people, it's sort of like sealed play for any sort of card game, whether it's the Pokemon TCG, Magic, Transformers, Yu-Gi-Oh!, what have you. Where the idea is you have a box of booster packs, whether it's a predetermined set or one made exclusively for sealed play, and all you do is simply open your packs, see what you get, and try to make it work within the confines of this set. That's kind of what's going on with Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. It's cherry-picking certain things. It's cherry-picking certain moves, certain Pokemon, certain mechanics, putting it all together for its own self-contained game, and the polish just stands out so much to me. There is enough attention to detail here that it works. Stuff like Stealth Rocks is very, very questionable, but overall, the mechanics and everything else regarding it feel rock solid. It feels really, really, really nice. I can't describe it enough other than it is its own self-contained game. It's taken aspects of other core Pokemon games and making just a general purpose RPG using Pokemon as the setting. And it worked. It really worked. I had a lot of fun with this. And I can't really say anything else other than I can honestly recommend this to people if you want just a fun RPG experience. Not the deepest RPG experience, mind you, but a fun one. And yeah, there's not much else I can really say there in regards to the campaign itself. The online though, well, guess what the last con is. And the number 1 con of Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee is... the online functionality is awful. If you wanted any evidence that you weren't meant to take this game seriously on a competitive level, look no further than the online infrastructure for this game, because this has to be a joke. We're on a platform where we have universal friend codes, basically, where all you have to do is add someone, they're on your friends list, you can see when they're online, and in almost every given multiplayer, you can join them in a game fairly easily, fairly efficiently. And this is also on a platform where you now need to pay for the online. And yet, despite that, we don't incorporate the fact that you've added someone to your friends list into this game at all. Instead, the way you battle and trade in this game is by effectively putting in a 3-digit code, and then hopefully no one copies the same code as you and snags the trade or battle. Pikachu, Pikachu, Pikachu is effectively randoms in this game, because all you have to do is set that as your code for a battle or trade, and I guarantee you, within seconds, you're going to have some random person from somewhere around the world, and they'll either have a team that makes it obvious they just started the game, or they'll straight up have a fully evolved and properly competitive team that'll mop the floor with you. Either or is kind of ridiculous, and it makes streaming a game like this impossible, because effectively you'd have to cover the code so no one else snags it, or rely on the honor system and hope that no one snags the code while you wait for your actual opponent. The same thing can happen with trades too. It's a real easy way to accidentally lose a Pokemon by trading it to the wrong person if you put in a very simple code. Sure, it's effectively a poor man's wonder trade, but that's exactly what it is, and it's not quite a suitable replacement. But going back to Wi-Fi battles, you only have a handful of options. Singles, doubles, and between those two, you have no restrictions or normal rules, otherwise regarded as the restricted rules. Battling with no restrictions turns AVs on, so all the candy you've been shoving down a Pokemon's throat will apply into the online battle, but so will their level. Meaning, you have to grind to level 100 in this game, which straight up is calling back to Gen 5, where you had to grind to level 100 if you wanted to play competitive at all, but now you also have to deal with AVs, which, as stated previously, allows you to pump every stat on a Pokemon by 200 points, which ultimately either leads to a very one-sided battle or a very tanky battle. This wouldn't be so bad if matches didn't have a hard time limit of 20 minutes. So online single battles are a joke in this game because it comes down to a glorified game of whack-a-mole where you're just hitting each other back and forth. Double battles have the pace necessary to be done within the 20-minute time limit, but as also stated previously, it also lends itself to the potential of people just stalling out a match to run out the clock if they have a lead in Pokemon at the time. Stuff like this is flawed and stupid, and on top of all of that, there's no verse recorder. You can't save matches, you can't spectate matches, which means that for someone like myself, running a tournament for this game is not impossible, but showing you guys that tournament pretty much is. Sure, you could see me battle, I'd have to do it live, but you wouldn't be able to see anyone else. And that kind of sucks. That really sucks. I don't know why there is no verse recorder in this game. I get why there's no leaderboards, but how come you can't just interact directly with people who are on your friends list? Why do we have to rely on this stupid code system, which is a carryover from Pokemon Go, mind you? But why is it here, rather than to remind people who are familiar with Pokemon Go how these things work? It's stupid, very stupid, and I can't defend it at all. One of my most common complaints throughout the Let's Play was just how stupid the online infrastructure for this game was. It's playable, but it's by far the biggest sign that you aren't meant to go into this game for the competitive element of it. It's there, but it's not the main feature. It's quite clearly the campaign and the experience of just playing the game through the Kanto region. Overall, it's flawed, and I hope we never see anything this bad again, because while the Fizzle Plaza was okay, it is a godsend compared to the stupidity that is the online here. Just, oh, it's so terrible. I hate it. Just, gah. But now, I think I can give some overall final thoughts. Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee was a really weird game to play, experience, and just think about and analyze. A lot of us went in wanting to hate it. A lot of people were geared up and ready to just burn the thing apart, put it in a blender and just shred it to pieces. But it turns out that no, a lot of people were quickly won over by it. When I was in the early phases preparing for the Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee Let's Play, I was prepared to have a lot of recurring guests because I wasn't sure how many people were actually going to get the game. And then, as it turned out, I never had a repeat guest within the main story itself because everyone ended up picking it up and everyone was enjoying it. They did have their faults with it. No experience was 100% perfect, but overall, a lot of people found it refreshing. It felt fun. A lot of people were just enjoying themselves. It felt good to enjoy a Pokemon game and just be able to sit back and relax a little. That's the main thing I could walk away from with this. Pros or cons, it had its faults. There was a lot of negativity going into it, but I think overall, a lot of people walked away happy. A potential downside to the game as well is the fact that once you beat it, there really isn't much to go back to because the online is so terrible that, yeah, once you're done, it's going to sit on a shelf and possibly be traded in. There might be replayability. There's definitely new ways to enjoy Pokemon with Let's Go itself. It's definitely a boost to shiny hunters as it's a new way to experience the thrill of seeking out shinies. And even people who enjoy doing Nuzlocks have an interesting alternative for how to go about a traditional Nuzlocke run, seeing as the most beneficial way to gain experience in this game is from catching Pokemon, so it'll be very curious to see what ends up becoming the most generally accepted rules for a Nuzlocke run of Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, especially when you consider the fact that wild encounters are now no longer random. But overall, the game has provided new ways to enjoy Pokemon, has shown a lot of thought and consideration for the future, whether it's new Let's Go games, possible spin-offs focusing specifically on Let's Go, and certain battle mechanics which might be interesting to see if they carry over into Gen 8 or other games that come out in the near future. There's a lot to wonder and speculate about, but overall, no game is perfect, but this game definitely felt sort of like an apology to what happened with Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, and at the very least, I look forward to what Gen 8 can bring. I'm a little scared, I'm a little cautionary, but Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, if nothing else, showed that they're paying attention, showed that they're being mindful, they're willing to experiment, test things around, and try to make things work. The change to teleport is fascinating. It's definitely a way to address the broken nature that came out of a move like Baton Pass, in that it's a -6 priority move that switches out to Pokemon but doesn't take any buffs or substitutes they might have had on them. And on Pokemon like Chansey, which learned teleport in this game, that was actually really handy. So that was kind of cool to see. But with all of that said, what will the future bring? Who can say, really? As I've said previously, I had fun. I'm not coming to this game for the online, but as far as an experience is concerned, I walked away happy, refreshed, and honestly, I think it was a game we needed. I think now we should really move away from Kanto at this point, though knowing the upcoming Pokemon movie, we're going to get a bit more Kanto before we're done with it. But as far as the games are concerned, I think this is easily the best way to experience the Kanto region unless you intentionally want that old school nostalgic feel. This is a really good game. I like it. I enjoyed it. It's not perfect, but I had fun. And at the end of the day, having fun is the most important aspect when it comes to playing a video game. We shouldn't be frustrated or grumpy when we're going into a game. Even if it's a game that we don't like, there should still be some level of enjoyment. Even if you enjoy getting mad at a game, you should still enjoy what you're playing. 2018 was a really rough year for me, a really downer year. A lot of things happened that really affected me mentally and just I felt down a lot. And Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, it made me smile and it made me happy. And the fact that it could help do that, that's worth noting. It was a game that I, on a personal level, sort of needed, and overall, I'm happy I played it. And I don't mind paying for it twice because I'm just that kind of insane person. The Pokeball Plus was fun, and it added to the experience, and yeah, I had fun. And if you ended up picking up the game as well, I hope you guys at least had fun too, even if there are downsides that you yourself admit are there. I just hope that everyone gives this game a chance because it deserves it. It honestly, if nothing else, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee justified its own existence, in my eyes at least. But I'm curious what you guys think too.
Well, I suppose it wasn't that bad, but it wasn't what I wanted. Okay, Mankey's Paw, I wish for a Generation 8 Pokemon game. One set in a region based on Spain, with a fire type starter based on another animal from the Chinese zodiac. And I wanted to be open world, with a gym leader for every type, with new Mega Evolutions, new regional variants, over 100 new Pokemon. And I wanted to be one game, no more just 2-version junk. I want move tuners right away, and let's not forget no motion controls or dumb gimmicks either. And so help me if it has functionality with Pokemon Go.